Hello, my name is Daniel Simon. We are having the 10th anniversary of the anthology Business Architecture Management, Architecting the Business for Consistency and Alignment this year. As the editor of the book, I'm revisiting some parts with their contributors to reflect a little and also look at how things might have further evolved since then. Today, I do have the pleasure of having a conversation with James Lapalme, who contributed the foreword to the book. Welcome, James, and thanks for taking the time to have a chat with me today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So first of all, James, would you mind giving a quick intro of yourself? Just maybe some highlights about who you are, what you do, well, basically whatever you would like to share about yourself.
Yeah, well, look, a pleasure. So I've been in revolving around IT for the last 25 years. I'm a professor at the École de technologie supérieure in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. I've been an enterprise architecture practitioner for since the mid 2000s, and I've published a number of papers on the subject. One which is, I think, known by a somewhat large group of practitioners, the three schools of thought on enterprise architecture. And I've also contributed to a number of organizations around enterprise architecture, whether it be EA, BOK, or initiative that MITRE had, or the IEEE. So that's about me in a nutshell.
Great. Thanks for the intro. So, James, in the foreword to the book, you emphasized that with enterprise architecture and, well, business architecture alike, it's much about collective meaning making, right? With sort of all of us in our organizations being partners in execution in change. Well, and you did so and illustrated this in a really nice way by drawing a comparison between what architecture being practiced means and wine tasting. And by pointing out that there is something that those two fields of activity have in common. So could you first of all take us back to what made you put things that way in the foreword, and what is it that architecture has in common with wine tasting?
Okay, so well, first of all, I think there's two elements to understand that approach to enterprise architecture. One of them, I have a multidisciplinary background, so I have training in organizational psychology and management, not just on technical aspects. And at that time, I was taking wine tasting courses. And I remember during the courses, it was really interesting. We were tasting various types of wines and basically understanding different qualities and what it meant to have a wine that was perfectly balanced. And I remember tasting these perfectly balanced wines. I was like, I wouldn't drink this in a party. This is I understand it, not for me. Um, and that difference between what could be theoretically or right. And theoretically, it's kind of interesting here because the meaning of balance is socially constructed by wine connoisseurs. It's not certain for me that there is this technical definition of what balance means. But what was much more interesting about the wine courses is this group of people around the table trying these various wines, all having different impressions of what it is, and understanding that whatever social experience that you've had in the past, oh, I've tried this in this party and it was a really great party. This is a really great wine. Or I had went to this event, it was a bad event. I had this wine, it's a bad wine. So showing how the social world impacts us. And for me, and I was doing quite a bit of enterprise architecture at that point, and there was like this parallel with what I saw in organizations, also on various forums. This is what enterprise architecture is. This is what it should be, and this is what it could be. This is what I believe it is. This is what it must be. And basically, everybody's shooting in different directions. And thinking to myself, hey, this is exactly the same thing which is happening, or is to a certain extent. And also, like in the beginning of the forward, I made this little joke about the fact that most people would agree that wine tasting and enterprise architecture is a lot about people arguing about definitions that most people don't care about, and they're too expensive endeavors. So that's the parallels and why I came to that. So it's coming from a place where my bias is that a lot of what is important is socially constructed. So meaning that your background, your values, your life experiences comes to influence what you believe, and there is no universal truth about some of these concepts.
Mhm. So certainly nice analogy. So since you do quite a bit of teaching, I guess, James, generally speaking, have you found the use of analogies, metaphors to be of particular help when it comes to making people, well, especially those rather unfamiliar with the subject, understand what enterprise architecture or business architecture is essentially about? And if so, are there any other analogies or metaphors that you found to be especially useful?
Actually, I try to avoid analogies when I teach.
Hmm.
I think analogies pose a problem. So in my teaching, I use experiential based learning. So I try and work off of the lived experiences of the people in the room and help them make sense of their experiences. The problem with making analogies between various contexts is that it's metaphors. So it's putting a focus on what similarities there may be and completely erasing to a certain extent the differences. And often those differences are much more important to the discussion than what is similar. I mean, most people that have done enterprise architecture have heard the analogies between enterprise architects are like building architects, or they're
Hmm.
like urban planners, or they're like this and that. And I mean, the reality of it is that enterprise architecture is working in a domain which is not physical. So a lot of these analogies don't kind of work out. And I mean, let's not forget that an organization is a collective of people going about their business every day, almost like a script in a theater. So the organization itself is not something that you can actually point at. It's this ever flowing behaviors and dialogues that's going about. So having these very physical material metaphors is, I find, very problematic.
And is this different in practice, James? I mean, you were just referring to how you tend to teach without using analogies that much. Is it different in practice as a
Again,
practitioner?
yeah, again, I try and avoid making these analogies because, again, if you say enterprise architecture is like an architect, building architect, well,
Mhm.
necessarily the next thing that people believe is that, oh, so you're going to make plans, right? You're going to
Mhm.
make models. Or if you're an urban designer, the next thing that comes out is, oh, you're going to decide what policies there are to decide
Mhm.
how this city, which is your organization, is going to grow. And part of that is true to a certain extent,
Mhm.
but a lot of that is not true also. So no, when I practice, I basically sit down with clients and see what they're trying to achieve.
Mhm.
Actually, I don't. For many years now, I don't really say that I do enterprise architecture work. I basically say I do management consultancy work. I have an understanding of technologies and business, and
Mhm.
I take organizations where they are and I help them from there. Because I find it's a lot more helpful that way, and I don't get pigeonholed.
Mhm.
I don't know if that
Well,
makes sense.
yeah, certainly. Well, I would say, at least that's my experience. It can definitely help, yeah, using analogies, metaphors, to help people understand. But of course, you need to look at what's sort of an analogy that you may want to make use of, depending on whom you talk to, right? So depending, yeah, on whom you want to help understand what architecture is essentially about. Anyway, as you mentioned yourself, James, at the very beginning, let's take a look at the enterprise architecture schools of thought that you're quite well known for. So the three schools of thought that you identified, well, years ago. And that was actually also a reason for me to approach you and ask you whether you were willing to contribute forward to the book, as you might remember, which you kindly did. And although those schools of thoughts eventually did not end up being explicitly dealt with or referred to in the forward that you contributed, could you maybe talk a little about those three schools of thought? What are they? What are they about?
So there's the three schools of thought. Again, there's a context where I came up with this personal understanding of what was going on. So again, a lot of arguing on various professional groups or in organizations about what enterprise architecture was. Was it about technology? Was it more than about technology? And also having a background in organizational sciences and management, it occurred to me that depending what kind of training people had and what kind of experience they had with certain kinds of problems, their understanding of what was going on could be biased in certain ways. I mean, one of the most simple divisions of understanding that one can use is, do you have a systemic view of things or do you have an analytical view of things? I mean, and I won't give a course on that now. Russell Ackoff had a couple of good videos that you can find on YouTube that explains. But I mean, the gist of it is, do you believe that there's certain types of situations or problems that you can break down into sub situations and sub problems, solve each one of those problems separately, and have an optimal solution, and then just by combining those solutions, have a optimal solution for the whole? Or do you believe that there are certain set of situations or problems where the nature of the problem, what really defines it, is in the relationship between the parts? So if I say that I have these two parts which are in relationship, I have a distance between them which is defined. Now, if I remove one, I don't have that distance anymore. So by breaking up the problem, I've actually got rid of what I initially had. So if you have a analytical view of organizations, this mechanistic view, and I would refer people to Garrett Morgan's book on organizational metaphors. Well, necessarily you're going to have a tendency of breaking up the organization in different bits, one bit being IT, and then you're going to necessarily have the understanding that we could take strategy, break it up in bits, IT strategy being one, marketing strategy being the other. And we can also break up the organization in those that um, decide and those that execute. So you have horizontal and vertical breakup or division. That will bring you on a very different path toward enterprise architecture than if you believe that no, everything's interconnected and you can't separate those bits. So there isn't multiple strategies. There's one strategy, and there is a coherent execution across various dimensions of that strategy. So that's a first key element. The other key element is, do you have a closed worldview of organizations or an open view of organizations? So again, there's quite a bit of literature on this, but a closed view of an organization is a view where the perspective is centered on what's happening within the organization. The environment of the organization is not necessarily considered or talked about. In either the organization, there's this assumption within that perspective that either the organization is at the complete mercy of what's in the environment, Or at the contrary, the organization is completely in control of its environment and can do what it wants. The open view of organizations, the open systems view is that the organization has to be in adaptation to the environment and is responsible for both co-creating its environment, but also being influenced and learning from it. So if we take those concepts and you look at the whole discourse of enterprise architecture, well, everybody that's promoting enterprise architecture as IT architecture has this closed world view and has this analytical view of enterprise architecture, and it's these assumptions behind it. Those that are promoting more of a coherency within the organization, but does not necessarily take in consideration the environment, has a systemic view, but does not have an open systems view of the organization. And those which are considering having the organization adapt, being innovative to the environment, looking at how innovation is happening within the organization, basically not trying to optimize the organization, because since the environment is consistently moving and the organization has to kind of move with it, it's about creating capacity to innovate and learn. So it's about being making good decisions and not optimizing for a fixed decision. So this is where the three schools of thought kind of pop up. And
Hmm.
again, like most of the literature won't openly discuss those biases. They're latent within the discussion. So, I mean, so the magic of those three schools of thought is that when you're talking with somebody and you kind of get a sense of where their views are, you understand where the disconnects can be. And now, trying to change somebody's perspective of what enterprise architecture is almost like a religious debate, because
Hmm.
then it comes down to, yeah, but what beliefs do you have about organizations? Now, some people will say, yeah, well, the literature is pretty clear on what organizations are. They are open system, they are systemic, and that's my belief. But some people don't necessarily agree with that. So,
Hmm. So, and how is it today, James? Based on what you see, what would you say? Which of the three schools or, well, worldviews, if you want to put it that way? I do know that you did some more research throughout the years based on the three schools that you originally came up with. So, which of the schools of worldviews is most prevalent today, is adapted most in practice? And from your point of view, is this different from how things were, let's say, 10 to 15 years ago? Has there been a shift over time from one school to another in terms of what organizations seem to pursue, to focus on in their enterprise architecture efforts, also with respect to how they deal with business architecture?
oh boy, that's an interesting question, and I'm not sure how to answer it. I'll answer it indirectly, okay, and then I'll try and answer it directly. I think there's been some movement with regards to enterprise architecture in the field, but not in a good way. And some of the signs that I see of this is, as you might be aware, the Trends in Enterprise Architecture Research workshop was closed down. There wasn't enough submissions for it. And if I look at a lot of the key academics working on enterprise architecture or used to work on enterprise architecture, they're not so much working on that anymore. I mean, from my understanding, Jeannie Ross at MIT is, well, I believe she's retired now, but before, uh, from my understanding, MIT was not working so much on enterprise architecture anymore. If we look at some of the key people that were on the steering committee for TERS, they're not so much working on enterprise architecture anymore. Um, the Federation of Enterprise Architecture Professional Organizations kind of made a splash about 10 years ago that was led by Brian Cameron at Penn State. don't really hear much about them anymore. Eric Proper and another editor tried to create a journal on enterprise engineering. That didn't work out either. So it seems, and just recently, I've seen some key people in the community, such as Nick Malik, try to get work in enterprise architecture and having difficulties finding work. And I mean, this is one of the top enterprise architect practitioners in the world. So it seems that enterprise architecture is not as sexy for organizations, or I'm not exactly sure what they're doing. So historically, so I'm not sure that the health of enterprise architecture is high these days. Okay. Um, Historically, when you look at the three schools of thought, you could actually kind of separate geographically who was doing what. North America was in generally pretty grounded in the first school of thought, which was IT strategy. And I mean, they were heavily influenced by TOGAF. Then you had John Gertz and Friends, which was in Denmark, spreading the idea between coherency management. And a lot of the people in England, the Scandinavian countries, the lowlands, Germany often had a systemic view of enterprise architecture, so they would be more aligned with that coherency management. And then you had some other people which were influenced by the works of Fred Emery, such as myself, in open systems theory, Australia, um, some of the lowlands again, because they're also influenced by Emery's work and other people of the same nature, which were more of the third school of thought. Now, I mean, if you look at job descriptions, anyways, in North America, I don't know much about what's happening in Europe, but I'm suspecting something very similar. I mean, TOGAF is still very much requested. And I mean, if it's requested by organization, it says a lot about those organizations. Now, I mean, there's an inherent bias in what I'm saying. I'm saying this, saying that I might not have a good impression of what TOGAF is, and frankly, I don't really have a good impression about what TOGAF is. I mean, I did a paper with a student where we compared the practices proposed by TOGAF and historically what strategic planning did. Mintzberg wrote an interesting book called The Rise and Fall of Strategic Planning. And basically, TOGAF is proposing a copy paste of what strategic planning was. And naturally, if you look at all the problems that Mintzberg shows there are in strategic planning with practitioners and organization, we have exactly those same problems with enterprise architecture. So yeah, so I think enterprise architecture is in a rut. So naturally, I believe that business architecture also is somewhat in a rut. And again, there's a lot of debate. The enterprise architect associations will sometimes take the stance that enterprise business architecture is different than enterprise architecture. Actually, business architecture is either complementary or actually is wider than enterprise architecture. And then other people will say, no, no, it's the contrary. Business architecture is under enterprise architecture. So yeah, so your appreciation of what I'm saying will change depending on what your stance is with regards to this.
Definitely. And I would say, well, of course, you can look at this from different angles. I do think that there is some progress that was made throughout the past years, at least business architecture wise. Yeah, it's not necessarily always reflected in what an EA team does, though, right? But there's certainly more, let's say, business architecture happening out there nowadays. That's at least what I see in practice with a growing community of business architecture practitioners. So let's keep looking at business architecture, maybe. So, generally speaking, what would you say? How do you see the role of business architecture in the field in making an impact as an architect out there? What's the relevance of business architecture with sort of elements like capabilities and so on? Yeah. What's the relevance for practitioners to make an impact with what they do? Yeah, and maybe also somewhat shift the focus of their architecture efforts in line with what we've just touched on.
Well, I think for myself, my my personal opinion is that business architects should stop calling themselves business architects, and they should start calling themselves business consultants or management consultants. I think in order to be effective, and I've taken this stance with regards to other domains. I'll do an analogy here, and maybe I shouldn't, but I mean, I'm of the belief that an effective project manager is somebody that understands what they're managing. Okay, so basically project management, that you can't be a generic project management and they can move you from a construction project to an IT project to even within IT doing an infrastructure project to a software development or whatever. Those are not interchangeable. For me, an effective project manager has to understand what's going on. Okay, in the same idea. The same idea, same thing for helping organizations make business decisions. I think that business architects that have a language of capabilities and alignment and but don't have a real understanding of the business that they're working with, okay, are not going to be effective. But if you say that you have understanding of what a certain type of business requires as capacity to function adequately and how the various processes in the organization should be working coherently together in order to have a interesting outcome. Well, I mean, that means you're a management specialist in a certain sector, um, whether it be finance, banking, whatever, engineering. Um, I believe that business architects, and if you look at a lot of the tooling that business architects use, uh, they're basically business consultancy tools.
Mhm.
So, I mean, they're business consultants, whether it be internal or external. Um, so that's my view. So basically, business architecture practitioners should stay up to date with the new trends in business consultancy, necessarily whatever new literature there is with regards to how businesses and organizations function.
Mhm.
I promote the idea that to be an effective business architect or business consultant, if you don't have a basics understanding of organizational psychology, organizational design, the sociology of organizations, strategy, operations, and finance, and all this stuff, um, you're not going to be you're going to be good at drawing pictures, but you're not going to be good at facilitating powerful conversations that have to happen in the organization.
Mhm.
And I think ultimately, that's my perspective. Enterprise architects, business architects, our specialty is designing dialogues and
Mhm.
making sure that the correct dialogues have to happen in the organization for stuff to happen.
Mhm. And well, I would just add or summarize that way, James, what you just highlighted. I think that's pretty well in line with what we sort of tried to cover, well, with the book 10 years ago, right? Well, final aspect, James. With you being a scholar, of course, I'd also like to let you share your view on enterprise architecture and business architecture in higher education. So, what's the role that higher education can play in terms of how architecture is perceived and practiced out there, how the practice continues to evolve, yeah? And what should students at university actually learn about enterprise architecture and business architecture? What do you think is most important for someone to take away from university, from higher education institutions, as it relates to enterprise architecture and business architecture?
So that's an interesting question, and it's also one which is culturally biased. So if we look here, to my knowledge, okay, in Canada, I'm not aware of any particular training that focuses on enterprise architecture, both at the undergrad or at the graduate level. Okay. I remember a certain number of years back, Brian Cameron at Penn State had started a program in enterprise architecture. I don't know what the state of that program is or not, but from my understanding, in North America, enterprise architecture training would be far and few between. Okay. And I think one of the challenges that we have, and I'll look at myself as a practitioner, okay? As a practitioner, being an enterprise architect is you're in a very political role, typically a very senior role. Um, Sometimes at one of the highest levels that you can be without being a manager, and in certain or organizations as a professional giving advice, um, which means that most people that would acquire training at the undergrad level would not be able to use that training in the short to medium term because they would just not be legitimate to play those roles. Um, then and again, if we look at certain of the, let's say, traditional disciplines, which are associated with enterprise architecture, which would be either management, IT, or engineering. Well, here in Canada, the engineering training is very defined. There is no room to add that kind of stuff. Typically, computer science and informatics is very mathematical oriented. There's not much given an organization science in there. And typically, business training, they're so focused at touching all the various aspects of the organization that, yeah, enterprise architecture doesn't really fit in that. Now, if you go at the graduate level, which would have more mature students, some of them which would probably be more legitimate in playing those roles. Again, I'm not aware of in Canada any enterprise architecture training which is offered at the graduate level. I believe that Penn State used to have training. I know certain organizations might offer continuous education training, which I don't necessarily associate with university training per se. They may be given in the context of a university, but they're not managed, defined, and of the same level as typical accredited university training. I think that I think the problem is that there's so few people interested in enterprise architecture because I mean there's not that many enterprise architecture or business architecture roles. Okay, that probably why there's very few programs is that it would be very difficult to sustain. Um, I mean, in the business world, I see a lot of programs associated with business analysis. Okay. And then we could have a whole debate what's the relationship between business analysis
Mhm.
and business architecture. But the business analysis roles that I've seen, I'll talk for Canada, typically revolve around two aspects. Uh, Basically, people that have, in a business context, have something close to an industrial engineering training. So they learn about processes, process improvement, So we're like Lean, Six Sigma, that kind of stuff. Okay. And then there's other people which they'll dig into certain very particular business aspects of a sector. So they'll learn very much about the logistics of trading or the various aspects related to global finance or something like that, and they'll become business analysts. So basically, subject matter experts within a certain sector. But business architecture, as we're discussing it here, which is about people which have act as consultants, internal or external, have the organization reflect on their business model, what kind of capacities the organization needs to be able to execute that business model, um, looking at policies. That is something which is typically more what I see associated with people in the um, strategy field of
Mhm.
management. So, okay, so to summarize this, it comes down to a little bit what I said before. I don't think there's a big appetite in universities for this type of training. I don't know how it is in Europe, and I'd like to hear you talk about that. Um, I think here in Canada, it's mostly about business training, business strategy, and what's in the book is like floating in a no man's land between the world of practice, the world of technology, and the world of business. What have your experiences been? How is it in Europe?
Well, I would say it's um, attracted more and more attention. Yeah? So more appetite, yeah, if you want to put it that way, that I've been seeing, yeah, in terms of uh, enterprise architecture and also business architecture to some extent, yeah, at universities. But generally speaking, there's definitely some more way to go. Yeah, so I see what you've been saying. From my point of view, that's really a crucial thing, yeah? To help the discipline, yeah, to take further steps in practice, yeah? At least to well, students leaving university, yeah, at least those having studied information systems, business administration, yeah, and similar fields of study, I think should have heard something about enterprise architecture and business architecture. Of course, that won't solve all the issues, yeah. But at least it will help, yeah, for those architecture practitioners out there, yeah, to deal with people in organizations for whom enterprise architecture and business architecture is not something completely unfamiliar and completely new thing. And that might also help apply it in a more effective way. That's sort of my view on that. And that's why I was interested in hearing your views on this.
So you see
Anyway,
that
I get, sorry.
for myself, I'm not teaching enterprise architecture or business architecture per se, but I give three graduate level courses.
Hmm.
One of them is in facilitation, so how to construct and design dialogues.
Hmm.
I give another course on how to intervene using a systemic perspective to organizations. And I give a course on change and innovation, so
Hmm.
how organizations change. So for me, that's how I'm contributing to the practice by giving people the tools that they need to approach these types of problems,
Hmm.
but they're not labeled.
Okay, I see. Well, still, of course, that's certainly a very valuable thing. Yeah, whether you call it enterprise architecture then or not. That's then a different story. But well, if you sort of equip people with the techniques and the approaches that they will need, hopefully apply them in practice, that's of course a very valuable thing. Okay, James, any other final thoughts you'd like to share? Anything you definitely want people to take away from our conversation?
Well, I think one thing to take away is that there's geographical differences that are going on.
Hmm.
And ultimately, for practitioners, they should be attuned to those geographical differences. And if ultimately they want to be effective, they have to be they have to act at least initially in socially acceptable manners to what organizations are expecting and conform to whatever requirements that they have. Or else, like for example, I mean, I might be for or against TOGAF here in North America, but if I want to get into organizations, chances are I better be TOGAF certified. Um, what I do afterwards depends. So again, coming back to the three schools of thought, these are socially constructed concepts. There's going to be different perspectives on this, and I'm happy to hear that in certain regions that it's going better than others. Now, having said that, I have seen a major decline in research on the topic. I think I could probably count on the fingers of one hand the people which are still doing research on enterprise architecture. Um, so I would definitely encourage people that are thinking about doing graduate studies that have enterprise architecture at heart to, or business architecture, um, to definitely try and add to the literature, but not in a theoretical fashion, in a very pragmatic fashion.
Mhm. Okay, thank you very much, James, for taking the time to have this conversation with me. Really enjoyed it. Some great thoughts and insights you shared. So many thanks.
It was a pleasure. Thanks a lot for having me.